Hello everyone and welcome back to the Racing Writers Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kelly Crandall. My guest today is Joey Meier, the spotter for NASCAR Cup champion Brad Keselowski at Team Penske. Joey and I sat down a few weeks ago at Bristol Motor Speedway in a suite high above the racetrack that the spotters hang out in because I wanted to pick his brain about the art of spotting a restrictor-plate race. Of course, we are going to Talladega Superspeedway this weekend, and the spotter is just as important as the driver, as a fast car, and making the right decisions in the draft. And I wanted to, again, pick Joey's brain about his role, the information that he gives Brad, and how long they've worked together to pick up now 5 wins at Talladega. They will go for their 6th this weekend. So in this podcast, some of the things you're going to hear will include the previous drivers that Joey Meier has worked for before pairing up with Brad Keselowski, and how his start in the sport actually happened with a chance meeting with Dale Earnhardt. You're going to hear how he prepares to spot a restrictor plate race and the homework that he and Brad actually do together. It's a bit different than if they were going to a Bristol or going to a Richmond, which we just came off of last weekend. You're also going to hear the information that he's focused on giving Brad throughout a race that will translate to how Brad is able to make the right moves, to control the draft, what lanes he needs to be in, and how he knows what is going on around him. It's all about painting that picture. And Joey's also going to describe the differences to him between blocking and managing the draft. You're going to hear why he uses certain language when he communicates with Brad, the reason for feeding him constant information. If you've ever heard Brad and Joey communicate on the radio, Joey Meier is always talking. He's always telling Brad what is going on. He's always painting a picture, and there's a reason for that. And you're even going to hear a really neat story about how Joey was involved in Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s win at Daytona in July 2001. I'm sure everybody remembers that emotional race after they had lost Dale Earnhardt. So that's ahead on this week's podcast. Again, thank you for all the ratings and reviews. I hope you are continuing to do that. Next week's guest will be Matt DiBenedetto from Go Fast Racing, and in future guests will be Brett Moffitt. I still have those interviews coming up for you, but this week it's all about Joey Meier and getting ready for Talladega Superspeedway. So again, this was recorded at Bristol Motor Speedway. You're going to hear some background noise as practice was going on, and you're even going to hear us kind of joke and make reference to his Team Penske teammate TJ Majors, who now spots for Joey Logano. TJ kept popping up over the partition to see what was going on, was kind of dogging Joey with his cell phone and taking pictures, and got a good laugh. So that is this week's episode. I don't want to hold you out any longer. So here's Joey Meier as we talk about racing at Talladega and Daytona and a spotter's very important job. First with just your, I mean, you already touched on it, but now that we're rolling, so start with your just background in the sport, how long you've been doing this,
Sure.
Kind of who you've worked with along the way. I mean, you don't have to go, too much in detail, but just for those who are going to listen and want to know maybe a little bit more about you, you do have a kind of a rich history in this sport.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know how far back you want to go, but before I was born, my dad and my uncle raced on the beach at Daytona.
Wow.
So when my dad showed up, his car number was 238.
That's funny.
Okay, well, it gets better. He had to change his car number because it got taken by the guy that showed up before him.
Okay.
Some guy you may have heard of is Ned Jarrett. So Ned Jarrett took my dad's car number. And so my dad changed his number to 288. Okay, so that was in 1958, the last year they ran on the beach. Now we fast forward to my early high school years back in the early 80s, and I was racing as much as I could and working on race cars. So I knew I wanted to be in racing. I graduated in 84 on a Wednesday. That Saturday, I was at Hialeah Speedway, and my mom was involved in an airplane accident. She was critically injured, and I went to the hospital. Boom, that got me into flying. Okay, we'll skip the intermediate rehab portion. But that got me into flying. So now I've been racing all my life, auto mechanics in school. Now I get into flying. So now I go to auto aviation maintenance to work on airplanes. That allows me to pay for my flight training. So now I'm flying and I'm working on airplanes, but I'm out of the racing because I'm busy working. Dale Earnhardt flies down to Marathon where I was working on airplanes. The guy fueling the airplane knew I was a huge NASCAR fan. He goes, "Guess who just flew in?" "Who, Dale Earnhardt?" "No way." I roll my toolbox over to his airplane. He signs the back of my toolbox.
That's fantastic.
Okay. I get his pilot's name and number in 1988. 1997, they hired me because I harassed them for 10 years. But in the meantime...
A story of persistence, though.
Well, exactly right. It took me 10 years. But I talked to Mike Collier, who was my boss back then. Talked to him once a month. Talked to him all about racing, and he didn't care about it. He was just flying for Dale Earnhardt Jr. It didn't matter. So 1997, I got hired. And the day I got hired, the first trip we did back in the day was we raced Milwaukee with the trucks and the Busch cars. And then we ran Steve Park in Daytona at Daytona in the Cup car. So I flew the Busch team and the truck team to Milwaukee. The minute I got there, I put a headset on and I was working on race cars because that was my dream job, right? Sunday we go down and pick up Steve Park. But I had a headset on from day one, okay? A year and a half later, they have that bad ARCA wreck in Charlotte.
Yeah.
Okay. NASCAR mandates that we have spotters now at the track whenever cars are on the track. Boom. We only had King Airs at the time. We didn't have enough seats to bring extra people to the track. We already had a guy at the track wearing a headset that we could stick on the roof. Me.
So you kind of fell into it.
Well, because, and then once I got there, I was able to advance my way to being a full-time spotter. You see what I'm saying? So I went from just being there at the right time, right purpose, to now my very first job, Stevie Reeves was spotting for Kenny Wallace in the one car during the time Steve Park got hurt, and he got in a car wreck on a way to Charlotte. I get a call. I'm up in Raleigh somewhere. Ty Norris calls me and says, "We need you at the racetrack." Okay, I'm coming. My first full-time race, Kenny Wallace, Charlotte Motor Speedway. Can't tell you where we finished, but that was my first full-time race. But people would say, "You articulate very well. You should do this more often," right? That's so you keep going forward, right? When Dale got hurt or got killed in 01, I spotted for Kevin Harvick for about 5 or 6 races because they didn't have anybody, right? Well, it was a week-to-week basis, and they kept saying, "Maybe can you do this full-time?" I'm like, "I'm working at DEI. How can you do it over here?" So it was a week-to-week. Well, then Gil Martin, who was his crew chief at the time, said, "Joey, I appreciate you doing it. Keep doing it, but we need to hire somebody full-time." So I was off that deal. Well, then in 02, beginning of the year, I started spotting for Michael. And then for Michael was 02, 03. Truex came on the Busch car in 04 and 05. I did all of his stuff. Did all of Michael's up until 06. Did Truex from then. And then in 06, we didn't have a Busch car. Well, it's all connected. It's all that 6 stages of Kevin Bacon story.
I love
right?
it.
So in 06, we didn't have a Busch car at DEI, right? Some young kid from Rochester Hills, Michigan, comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm trying to drive this team. Are you doing anything?" I said, "No, Brad Keselowski, I'm not doing anything." I start spotting for Brad Keselowski at Keith Coleman Racing.
So you and Brad have known each other and worked
since
together?
Since 06.
Wow.
So in 2009 at Michigan, he's like, "Hey, I'm coming to Team Penske. I'd like you to come work for me." "Well, are you going to buy an airplane?" "Yeah, I want to buy an airplane." "Okay." Truex was leaving.
Yep.
Right, he was going to go to Michael Waltrip's. Jamie McMurray was coming from Ganassi. He was going to drive the one car, or from wherever he was. I'm trying to think. I think it was Ganassi at the time in 09, 010.
Yeah.
Okay. He was going to bring Lauren Ranier with him. So I wasn't going to have a spotting job. So it all connects, right?
Yeah.
So it worked out that he's going to... So now I'm working for Brad Keselowski in 2010. And I've been there ever since.
That's awesome. I love how that works in this sport where everything it's such a small world.
Well, it is. Today's employee. You know, you have to remember that today's employee is tomorrow's employer. You know, that's very important.
That's very true.
These bridges are very small,
especially in this sport.
And they're all made out of Christmas tree timber. The minute you burn one, they all go up.
Oh my gosh!
So that's my story from how I got in racing all the way to now. So that's the Cliff Notes version.
Okay, well, I like it, and we'll circle back to your relationship with Brad as we get going. So, as I said to you when I pitched this, I wanted to talk about the art of restrictor plate racing.
Sure.
Because again, I feel like, you know, when it comes to listening to spotters on the radio, you and TJ are just fascinating with the information you give, how you work with your driver throughout the race. So I guess it's kind of a broad question, but when Daytona or Talladega is coming up, what's kind of like your first thought from your point of view and what in terms of what you have to go there and do?
You know, we race those kind of tracks 4 times a year. Who's making fun? Yeah. We race those tracks 4 times a year.
Speaking of TJ.
Yeah, exactly. But we race those tracks 4 times a year. At every other track except for those speedway races, it's all the same procedure.
Okay.
Inside, outside, where are we beating, where are we getting beat at when you're on pit road. But for those 4 racetracks, as a spotter, you switch gears because you understand it's a different racetrack. And a lot of us will look forward or look back and review races from the past, specifically when there's configuration changes. If the cars haven't changed much, then the packs won't change much. But then we get with our driver about the previous race. 4 times a year we talk to him. Every Monday after every race, I talk to Brad after the race. Specifically going to a speedway race, we talk before.
Okay.
And that's one of the 4 times that we talk before a race. We're not going to talk about Bristol today. He's going to ask me during practice, or like he did today or tomorrow, where's the groove moving around, right? Well, that you talk about that during and after. But restrictor plate racing, you talk about it before. So to make sure you're on the same page, because we do talk so much. And ironically enough, if I win Bristol on Sunday, I will have had very little to do with that race, right? If I won Martinsville, if I won Texas. But when we go to Daytona and Talladega, chances are the winning spotter was working his guts off. And that's the difference that racetrack has. And
you do hear that a lot.
Yes.
You hear a lot of credit to the spotter.
Well, because it's just the racetrack now that you take your push to talk and you hold it and you talk for laps after laps after laps. So specifically trying to get out front. If I'm racing Bristol, we're at Bristol Motor Speedway, and I'm leading the race, I'm not doing anything to maintain that lead, right? I'm giving him lap times, who's running where. But at Daytona and Talladega, the art of being able to lead the draft is managing those lanes back and forth. And the drivers that can do it well stay out front longer. And the drivers that do it well, stay out front longer, are getting more information.
Yeah.
And that information only comes from one person, and that's the spotter.
Okay, so I do want to jump into that information, but you said 2 things there that really stood out. You and Brad talk before the race, and unlike maybe a Bristol or anywhere else. And then you also mentioned going back and looking at, kind of like we always hear drivers study, or they're looking at things before a race.
Correct.
Do you do that as well, specifically when it comes to Daytona and Talladega?
Yes, absolutely.
And what are the things that you are looking at?
Well, you're just trying to find patterns or see, in other words, if somebody, most likely, you're not talking about running in the 20th position, right? There's really very little you can do to make a move to go from 20th to 15th, right? That's not. But when you're leading the group or you're running second or third, you need to know, A, how did I lose the lead? Right? What actually happened, and that doesn't happen from the car directly behind you. It might happen 4 or 5 rows back. Or if you're the car 4 or 5 rows back, how can I get the lead? And so you're looking for patterns. You're looking for certain things that cars do. These cars push an incredible amount of air around them, and so they can manipulate cars around them, whether it's frontwards or backwards. And you look for those patterns so that the driver, because he's looking out front trying to drive his car, or in the mirror a little bit, but he can't see those gaps or those bubbles, as we call them.
Okay.
And so you're letting him know what's going on 2, 3, possibly 4 rows behind him. As one of the words that I started using a couple years back was the energy. Where's the energy forming? And that doesn't happen directly behind him, or it doesn't happen directly in front of him. And so he needs to know that, and that's the only way you can do it, is by going back and reviewing, going, I see how that does this, and you're looking at 2 or 3 different rows back, and here the energy's building, there it is, boom, it expands or goes forward. That's what we're looking for. You have very little opportunities, limited number of opportunities to take advantage of that energy, and that it's not like you carry energy for 5 laps.
Yeah.
Okay, it builds, and then it pops. It builds, and then it pops. And you want to be in the right place when it does.
And by you telling him that, it's helping him make a decision of where he needs to be in order to take advantage of that.
Correct.
So that's where that's where Brad comes in the sense of, he understands by what you're saying, he understands, okay, I need to either jump high or, continue to ride the energy and the momentum on the bottom.
So there's a very fine line between blocking and managing. Okay? If you're leading the race and the guys can't get to your bumper, you're managing the lane, right? As we saw at this year's Daytona 500, when the guy gets to your bumper, you did a bad job of managing, and now you are blocking.
Okay.
All right? The only difference being is the guy leading the race changed lanes, his timing was off, and the bubble was popped, and you no longer had that cushion of air protecting you from getting hit. because you were late on your managing skills. And that really has to do with, because if I tell Brad go high or go low, and he does it too early or too late, even by his standards, it's not just a matter of me telling him what to do. He feels it. He hears cars. He hears the RPM changing as the run stalls or the run goes. He's feeling his car and being able to manage those lines based on the information I'm giving him. It's not just the spotter. The spotter never should drive the race car, and the driver should never move without being given information. And that's why the marriage works well for guys like Dale Jr. and TJ and myself and Brad and Chase Elliott and Eddie DeHunt. Those guys are getting better at it, and it's just because you talk about it more, but it's a marriage of communication.
So I guess it sounds like when it comes to a Daytona and Talladega, going back to talking about the energy and trying to paint that picture, you're not necessarily focused on Brad per se. You're looking at everything that's happening around him, in front of him, behind him.
It's weird because if you're not leading the race, okay, you're trying to make moves based on what the cars in front of you are doing. If you're leading the race, you're making moves based on the cars behind you.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's going to sound like a crazy question, but I've always been curious when it comes to just spotting in general, and certainly with how much is going on at a plate track. Like how I don't really know how to phrase it, but when it comes to your eyes, like is it exhausting?
No,
like
because
what physical toll does that take?
For a lot of people, it's interesting. For me personally, I can't determine if it takes any physical or mental toll. Okay, the only thing that I can say I do well is I just verbiage articulate what my eyes are seeing. I'm not working. In other words, I'm not trying to decipher what's going on. I'm not trying to dig deeper. One of my downfalls, and I say it's all been a weakness, I can't tell you what happened the previous lap. I don't have any recall on what happened because I'm not trying to recall it. There's no useful purpose. Racing, as long as we're under the green flag, we're always moving forward, right? So going back to what happened a lap ago, I can't tell you. We wrecked this year at Daytona, and the first thing Paul said, "What happened, spotter?" I'm like, I don't know. I can't tell you what happened because I'm spotting from this moment and forward all the time. Forward all the time. So I'm not trying to remember or looking back on what happened off of 2 to worry about what happened in a turn 3. So from a mental standpoint, I'm not playing mental gymnastics because I'm not trying to drive the race car. Some guys do that more than I do. I'm not one of those guys. All I'm doing is giving Brad, if he had goggles on, I'm trying to give him a different view than what he sees. And that's all I do. So I just articulate, just talk about what my eyes are seeing, and it works out. So I just keep doing it. Yeah.
So one of the things that I've noticed listening to your radio quite a few times, and I even went on YouTube and pulled up, somebody had posted like a 3-minute clip of yours and Brad's communication during the 2016 fall, so that it would have been the chase race.
Yeah.
And there was 2 things that stood out in terms of how you communicate with Brad is, first, you're constantly talking.
Yep.
Is that something Brad likes?
Yes.
Or is that okay? So explain kind of the
100%.
Relationship that you and Brad have when it comes to what he wants, say here at Bristol, compared to when you go to Talladega.
So at Bristol, it's a basic. This is a standard, and I would call a standard spotters race.
Okay.
Okay. Here, once we get going, you're always looking ahead for things to happen very quickly. Based on me looking ahead, he can maneuver his car where he chooses to. I'm not worried about what's going on behind him, right? Because all the cars are essentially, you'd think, assuming we're not tore up, are going the same speed. I'm not worried about somebody running over him. So I'm always looking out ahead. You're giving lap times based on our car and maybe somebody we're catching, or if we're the leader of the car, how fast our pack is to the car behind us. You got a 2-second gap. Manage that lead. That was a 10. He ran a 20. You're just giving him information because he's going to be moving around on his own if he's leading. If we're not leading and we're running somebody down, he's going to change lanes. You don't know as a driver how fast the car in front of you is going, or if I picked up a half a tenth or a tenth or 2/10 of a lap, right? So here, and most racetracks, lap times are real critical. So we concentrate on lines, on grooves moving around, what our line is, what the leader's line is, and the lap times. At Daytona and Talladega, you take everything I just said and you throw it out the window. None of that matters. You don't care about lap times. You don't care about groove. You don't care about lines. You don't care what the leader's groove is doing or your groove is doing, because you're in this big swarm of cars. So again, if you're trying to move forward, you're looking forward, right? If you're trying to keep somebody from behind you moving forward, you're looking back. And that's the difference. And Brad is able to drive his car with a constant feed of information, being able to utilize what's going on around him, whether it's in front or in back. Here, even though we only run 20-second laps, I'll talk once a lap. Down the backstretch, I give him a lap time. And that's just kind of trying to get him into a rhythm. Whether he's chasing. Now, if we're all stoved up and got cars all around us, that doesn't matter. Lap times are irrelevant because we're only going as fast as the car in front of us. But once things spread out and you're running in clean air, he's always thinking, okay, how fast is my car? Am I really good right now? The car doesn't feel like it's driving very good, but I might be turning good lap times.
Okay.
None of that matters at Daytona and Talladega.
And at Talladega, again, he wants you talking
all
as much. So he's one of those, he doesn't care about how much of the information. He'd rather have all of the information.
Absolutely. In other words, I compare spotting to Brad as watching the Weather Channel. Okay? What time does the weather on the 8s? I just gave it away. What time does the local weather come on? It's weather on the 8s.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have the Weather Channel on in the background and you're doing your jobs around the house, weather on the 8s, all of a sudden your ears haven't been staring at the TV, but you hear weather on the 8s and you pick up. You have to go listen to the TV. It's still playing. It didn't change channels, but now you're going to listen to weather on the 8s. You're going to pick up what you want to hear. You're not going to go over and turn the TV off. You're going to go back doing what you were doing. And that's what Brad does. Brad's not utilizing every piece of information I have, but when he wants it, he wants it. So he picks and chooses what he listens to. He just wants it all there all the time.
But he knows it's there.
Yeah, exactly right.
So another thing that I noticed from the video, and again, just listening over time, is, and maybe it was just particular to that race, is you were specifically naming drivers who were around him instead of just either car number or whatever it may be. Is that something that you do in particular, or was
that's all. I've done that for a long time, just trying to give him an idea of who he's racing. So in other words,
so he better understands, like it registers more with him.
So I've alleviated a step in your brain.
Okay.
To take, in other words, if I tell you the 38 car to you, it takes you a second to go 38 David Reagan.
Okay.
If I say 34 car, well, that may have been Landon Castle. Who is it this year? Michael McDowell. So you've taken that, now you've alleviated that step of cars, and now you just have the drivers, which is all you're concerned about because the cars are equal.
Yeah.
Right? You're concerned about who, so now Brad knows, okay, how's Landon Castle going to drive, or how's Michael McDowell going to drive, or who can I help, who can I rely on, who's not going to be reliable on, who do I want to push forward. So you have that, you build the race around a personality of drivers.
And he kind of can figure out, okay, I know what he's going to do. So in that sense of like, okay, so he knows if you say Joey's behind him or Ryan's behind him, he knows what that means.
Yep.
Okay, if you say, Chase is ahead of him or whatever, he can figure out his strategy based on understanding.
If I say Kyle Busch is behind you, he knows he's probably not going to get a ton of help unless it's going to help Kyle.
Okay.
So that when Kyle moves us forward, he can expect Kyle to get out of the line. Right, and that's just the complete opposite way. If we have teammates behind us or teammates in front of us, you kind of know that you're going to work together longer and be a stronger pack. Harvick and the Ford Group guys got together and they say, look, we want to be a better company as a whole, not just individual drivers with individual teams. So you start putting that together based on driver names. It's just something I've done. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you if it's better, but my reasoning is you have a personality now attached to that car number behind you. It's not just a car number.
Again, you hear the name and you can put that together with something instead of, trying to piece together who's in the number.
Now, if Brad didn't like it, I think he would tell me.
Right.
And he's never said that.
Okay.
So that's why I keep moving forward. Like that whole energy thing happened in mid-race. Like that was a word, I think it happened at the end of 16. And because things were going, in fact, it had been 16 because I think we had to win that race to move on. And
I think TJ might be jealous.
So he, in mid-race, I was trying to shorten up because things were happening so quick.
I was going to ask that, or the reason you do use shorter phrases and words.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a specific reason behind that?
Just because things were happening so quick. If I sit there and go 5 cars back, they're starting to make a run. By the time I say that speech, they've already made their run. It's over with. So you were trying to just shorten things up. So the vernacular and aviation, that mentality was carried over, because in aviation, you're all talking on the same radio. So when you talk to a controller, you don't want to get on there and ramble. So you learn how to talk with short, concise bits of information. Well, I carried that over to racing and energy. He knew exactly what I meant mid-race, and I thought I could see him reacting quicker to what we were doing, and it just worked out. And then the guys in the pit box at the end of the night said I said it over 280 times. They had a line every time I said it. They counted a line.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was funny. But it was over 280 times that I said it during the race.
So there is a correlation between the aviation side of your life, and you can bring that to the racing.
You try to. That was the first thing that, when I started spotting on the one car, Bono said right away, you articulate well. And I think from an aviation side of things, that's how, back before spotters were spotters, the pilots used to spot. The Danny Collars, the Mike Colliers, the Eddie Mason Cups. There were a lot of pilots on the roof that spotted because they were given a headset and they talked well on the radio. They may not have known anything else, but when they talked on the radio, if I give you a headset right now, go spot this race, I'll guarantee you're going to push the button and then go, what do I say?
Yeah.
Right? As a pilot, that's natural to you, because you talk, you push the button and you talk. So our brains are wired that before I even push the button, I already know what I'm saying. It's just a matter of pushing that button, and that's how that works.
Okay.
So from the piloting standpoint, you know the art of talking before pushing the button.
Okay. I was very curious of that, and when I had mentioned to a colleague before I came up here to talk to you, they actually said, ask if that translates.
Yeah, that portion of it does. No, I still flight instruct on the side, and one of the more difficult things at not flying the airplane from a student pilot is talking on the radio, because they just push the button and go, what do I say? Because they all they know is that button has to be pushed in order to talk, but they don't think about what they're going to say. And then after you push the button, you don't want to ramble and have this whole long conversation. You want to be short and concise. And that mentality transfers, for me, directly over to spotting.
Okay. So a few more things for you, Joey, and I'll let you get back to work. I think you may have already answered this, but I want to ask it kind of outright in a sense. What is the most important information you can give Brad during a restrictor plate race? Does it go back to that energy thing and just what the lines are doing?
There's not. It depends on what situation we're in. But it boils down to, it's the information that Brad wants, right? It's not, and that's that relationship. Because if I went and spotted for another driver right now, I could give him the exact same information that I thought was important, but if he doesn't think it's important, then it's not. Then it's just a waste of time. So I don't want to sound vague, but the most important thing that I can give Brad is what Brad wants at that time. And that's where the marriage and the relationship works, because what I've given to him in the past has worked, and so we keep moving forward.
Okay.
And that's the only way I could explain that. So when we go to Talladega here in a couple weeks and Daytona in July, we talk and we move forward, and there's always one little thing that we may add. Hey man, keep an eye on this. Well, whatever that is that he wants me to do is important at that time. I can't go back and go, well, that was important 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Because, 4 years ago we were doing what I used to call pod racing, when we had the two cars stacked up. Okay, that was pod racing. Well, that information is way different than what we're doing now, but it was important back then, right? What's no longer important, and the only reason we know that is because of the relationship that we have. So what's important is what he wants, and that's why the relationship is so important.
I believe Brad now has 5 Talladega wins, if my math is correct, 4 or 5. He's getting up there.
Yeah, I was almost going to say 6 with the 09, with the victory in 09, but I don't know that. Maybe it's 6 with Daytona.
Okay. Well, he's getting up there. Yeah. So I'm curious, as the race goes on and you guys find yourselves in this position to where you're battling for the win, does anything change from what you had been doing throughout the race to the final maybe 20, 15 laps?
So does anything change?
Either in terms of what information he wants or things you're watching, or is it still all the way to the end?
No, that's the same to the end. the adrenaline level, and we've seen some of the spotters have worn smartwatches that show heart rates, and during the heart rate watch you can tell when they're leading or when they're not leading, and there's no doubt in my mind that as we get closer to the end, especially on those races that we have to win or we don't move on to the next level of playoffs, my heart rate's going up. So it's important for me to stay the same guy, to stay even keeled. And one time, Paul's had to get on the radio and just remind me just to take a deep breath, calm down, because I would elevate myself. As you're elevating at kind of towards the end of a song, and then you don't want Brad to elevate. You got there for a reason. So normally 188 laps at Talladega. You don't want to run 100 any different than you want to run 188. If you're leading at 100, you're going to be leading at 188.
So the way I want to end it, and you had talked about this before we started rolling, the relationship between a driver and a spotter and how a spotter adapts over the years and whatnot. When it comes to a driver being successful at a restrictor plate race, is there any correlation between having a good spotter in a sense? If that question makes sense, is a driver going to be good at a restrictor plate race if their spotter is someone who knows how to call a restrictor plate race, kind of like you or a TJ or an Eddie DeHaan, like the guys who kind of know what to expect. They know what they're looking for.
That would be a very good research project to go back with every restrictor plate race and to find a relationship that's brand new or a spotter that was just a normal spotter. But if you go back to, Denny Hamlin's done a good job, which is Chris Lambert. And again, we go back and I'm just trying to think of, the Kevin Harvicks, the Joey Logano's. Those guys, they have all been together for a long time. The relationship was there for many years. The spotter had been doing that job. He may not have been with that driver, but he'd been doing that job for a long time to create the experience, because it's such a different race between the Talladega, Daytona, and every other track.
So maybe not their relationship, but just experience on both sides is going to help at Daytona and Talladega.
Absolutely, and that's the one track where we hang our hats on. We are very proud anytime you can get a win. I've been fortunate enough with Brad to win this Cup race twice and multiple Busch/Xfinity races. We won Truex's first race here in 2004. Been very, very happy here at Bristol.
I remember that race. That was a good race.
When we walk down the roof and we take our pictures, we're proud as can be. But we know at that point we were a safety device, right? We weren't a performance device. When we walk away from Daytona and Talladega successfully, we know we were more of a performance device and still be a safety device, but we did more performance there than at any other track.
Okay, so I guess I'll end it with this if I can throw out one more.
You're fine.
You personally, Joey, when you look back at Daytona and Talladega, what is a memorable plate race that you've been a part of? Either maybe one that you won or didn't win for any particular reason, or maybe one that you're most proud of?
If we narrow them down to restrictor plate wins, right? I was a part of Dale Jr.'s first Daytona win in 2001 in July. We ran the baseball car.
Yep.
That was back in the day that we used to use two spotters. Ty Norris did the front stretch, I did the back stretch.
Okay.
We had a yellow flag, maybe red flag at the back stretch, and Dale had pitted, and we'd come out 7th, 8th, 9th, something, and we weren't leading. We were really good. And he was really freaked out just that he wasn't going to win this race. It was the first time being back.
The late caution, and you guys, I think, took two tires.
Got goosebumps.
Yes.
Okay. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I gave him a little speech. Man, you're good. You're going to be great. Don't worry about it. Your car's great. We won that race.
Wow.
That was really cool, right? Okay, so that's a really cool event.
Yeah.
I don't know how I put that above winning the Daytona 500 with Michael. Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't know how I can do that. But from an intensity level standpoint, we've won Talladega twice, having to make the next round of the playoffs.
Yes.
Those are you come in and people around me go like, how do you do this? Like, I don't know how we do it, but we've won two of those. So those four races, I was fortunate enough to win the 100th race at DEI. We won IRP with Truex at Indianapolis Raceway Park. And then I was ironically fortunate enough to win the 100th Penske race when Brad won Daytona.
That's right, yes.
Okay, so
it was the 100th, yeah.
Yeah, it was our 100th race. it's one of those few trophies I have at my house is a 100th win trophy. So you can see how there's different reasons that I just mentioned 4 races that they're all really, really cool races. And ironically enough, we've got over 20 Cup wins. Those stand out because of the involvement the spotter has with the driver.
So just as a driver has, particular moments in races that they remember, it's the same thing for anybody else on the team. There are certain things that make it stand out.
And as good as we've been fortunate enough to be good at restrictor plates, I'll always go back to 2008, wrecking Robert Richardson in a Busch car at Talladega. That's one of those memories that comes to mind like yesterday because I knew that I was more responsible for that wreck than any other wreck. Wrecked Robert Richardson. It was Kevin Barnwell was spotting for the other car that we wrecked. We wiped out about 4 or 5 cars, and it was all based on how I called that race. So that's one of those things that when you ever spot a restrictor plate race, you never want to be that guy to cause the wreck. And it'll normally happen at least once during every race.
Yeah. Well, Joey, I really appreciate all the time here at Bristol, and I think you might have to go soothe TJ's feelings over there. I think he's a little jealous.
Well, I don't know about that. But